You belong in a nursing home, not a palace. This was the barb my daughter-in-law delivered with a laugh, right there in the grand foyer of the mansion I'd acquired through 31 years of dedicated labor. And just moments before that, my son, my sole heir, had stated with finality, "This belongs to them now, Dad. Don't ever set foot here again." Them, referring to his wife's parents. My son had decided to cede my $12 million estate in Palm Beach to his in-laws. He conveyed this news to me in my own entryway on my own flooring, while his wife made light of my supposed need for institutional care. I was 68 years old, and I want you to understand precisely what I did, because it's important. I offered a smile, a nod, and responded, "Very well." I then retrieved my hat, exited through my own front door, entered my vehicle, and drove away, never once raising my voice. They believed they had triumphed. I'm certain of it. As I later learned, Tara contacted her mother from their driveway before I had even cleared the property. 11 days after that, her family arrived with 3 moving vans. And what awaited them inside that residence caused my daughter-in-law to drop the keys on the entryway floor. She literally dropped them. I was standing approximately 15 feet away and heard them strike the marble. But I'm getting ahead of myself. None of this will make sense to you unless I recount it chronologically. You need to grasp how a man relinquishes a property he never truly lost, and what was revealed beyond that threshold when they opened it. I promise you now, it's not what you're imagining, and it has nothing to do with money. So, bear with me. This is a narrative about a man told he belonged in a care facility rather than a stately home, and about his subsequent actions regarding that very home. I assure you, the moment those keys clatter to the floor is worth the anticipation. Let me rewind. My name is Graham Fielding. I am 69 years old now. All of this transpired last year when I was 68. I want to begin by explaining how I acquired that estate, as everything in this account hinges on it. I did not inherit wealth. My father worked as a delivery driver, and my mother managed payroll for a school district. We lived comfortably, but we were not affluent, and no one in my family had ever owned anything of significant insurable value. I attended a state university on a partial scholarship and with earnings from summer job. Upon graduation, I entered the industrial supply sector, dealing in pumps, valves, and fittings, the decidedly unglamorous backbone of American manufacturing. And I excelled at it. I dedicated 11 years to working for others, mastering the intricacies of the business. Then, at the age of 33, I mortgaged everything I possessed to acquire a struggling regional distributor. For the subsequent 31 years, I painstakingly built it into a substantial enterprise. It's not a household name. No one has ever heard of it. However, by the time I divested it, it was generating significant revenue across 6 states and employed 411 individuals. I sold that company when I was 64 years old, and that is the source of all the funds involved. 31 years of effort, followed by a single Tuesday afternoon and a signature. And with that, I purchased the villa in Palm Beach. I wish to be transparent about that acquisition, as I've had ample time for reflection, and I don't emerge from the contemplation looking as commendable as I prefer. Corey, my wife, had harbored a lifelong desire for a home overlooking the water. Her entire life. She grew up in Ohio and, at 19, tore a picture from a magazine, a white house flanked by palm trees, beside a sapphire blue pool. She preserved that image. For over 40 years, through every period of financial strain and those arduous early years when I was away from home 200 nights annually, she kept that photograph tucked away. I want to share details about that picture because I still possess it. It was ripped from a publication, its edges softened by repeated handling. A prominent fold marked where it had rested in a drawer for 4 decades. And in all 41 years, she never once, not a single time, asked me for it. She never uttered, "When are we getting my house?" That was not her nature. Occasionally, usually during the winter months or when times were difficult, she would retrieve it, gaze at it for a moment, and then put it back. I once interpreted this as patience. I have since concluded it stemmed from a deeper, sadder source. I believe my wife had quietly come to terms, around the 15th year of our marriage, with the reality that she was wedded to a man who would be absent for the majority of her life. That photograph served as her visual anchor to a future where his sacrifices would ultimately prove worthwhile. So, when the funds became available, I purchased the house from her cherished picture. As close as possible. $12 million, white facade, palm trees, a pool that seemed to merge with the ocean. And here's the part for which I bear full responsibility. I acquired it too late. Adeline was already unwell when the purchase was finalized. We discovered her condition approximately 6 weeks after moving in. She resided in that house for 14 months, some of them pleasant, most of them not. And then she passed away in the upstairs bedroom, in the very home she had yearned for her entire life. I sat on the edge of that bed, realizing, far too late to rectify, that I had spent 31 years acquiring a house for a woman, when what she truly desired was a husband who was present. I will share the singular positive aspect of those 14 months, and then I will put it aside. There was a period during the second spring, perhaps lasting 5 weeks, when she felt genuinely well. Every morning during those 5 weeks, I carried a chair down to the seawall at the end of the lawn, and she would sit there with her coffee, simply observing the water. That was all. Every morning. And on approximately the third occasion, she remarked, "Graham, this is the longest you've stayed in one place since 1987. And she was smiling when she said it. It struck me like a piercing arrow because she was correct, and we both understood the profound cost. 31 years I was away, and I received 5 weeks of seaside companionship. That is the sole reason this narrative concludes as it does. Everything I did subsequently was a consequence of those 5 weeks and the understanding they imparted about the true purpose of a home. That was 3 years prior to all these events. Now, allow me to tell you about my son. Miles is 39. He is my only child, and I love him. I want to state that unequivocally from the outset, given everything I am about to disclose. Miles never lacked for anything, and that is entirely my doing, not his. By the time he was old enough to perceive it, I had achieved success, and I was also absent. I engaged in the common practice of successful but absent fathers. I paid. Education, vehicles, an apartment, a wedding, a business venture of his that endured 19 months and cost me $240,000. A second business idea that never progressed beyond a logo. He is not unintelligent, nor is he precisely lazy. What he is a man who has never, in his entire life, had to discover his true capabilities. Because each time he approached the precipice of such a discovery, his father readily provided financial assistance. This is not a character deficiency I am at liberty to lament indignantly. I cultivated it. There is one childhood memory of Miles that remains indelible. He was 11 and had crafted something at school, a crudely made wooden box in shop class. The lid did not fit properly. He brought it to show me, and I was engaged in a call in the kitchen with a distributor in Tulsa. I held up my hand, palm out, indicating he should wait. I concluded the call. It lasted perhaps 4 minutes. When I turned around, he was gone, and the box was on the counter. I offered a casual, "Thanks, buddy," as he ascended the stairs. I discovered that box in a storage unit 2 years ago while sorting through Adeline's belongings. She had kept it for 28 years. I'm not recounting this for sympathy. I'm sharing it because when people inquire how my son transformed into a man who would relinquish his father's home to another, this is the honest genesis of the answer. and my fingerprints are all over it. He married Tara 8 years ago. She was 35 when this occurred, and I will be candid. I have heard countless men recount tales of their difficult daughters-in-law, and I have always considered that there are two sides to every story. Therefore, I will endeavor to be objective. Tara is not unintelligent either. She possesses an ambition that my son lacks, and she comes from a family with limited means. I understand desire. I understand it perhaps better than most, given my 31 years of striving. What I could never reconcile was the underlying calculus. From the very first year, I could perceive her strategic maneuvering, not maliciously, but relentlessly. Every conversation with me served a hidden agenda. Every visit contained an unspoken request, typically veiled in casual pleasantries. And after Adeline's passing, the calculations accelerated. Because after Adeline died, I made a grave error. I was 65 years old and had just lost my wife of 41 years. I found myself living alone in a $12 million house with 11 unoccupied rooms, and I was adrift. I lack a more precise term. I would wander the house at 3 in the morning. I ate standing over the sink. Rosa, I will address Rosa later. She is significant. Rosa would arrive on Mondays and invariably find the same plate in the same spot. Miles then suggested, "Dad, why don't we move in? Just for a while. You shouldn't be by yourself here." And I agreed. I want you to absorb that response, because I suspect some of you watching have acquiesced to similar propositions, and I want you to know I don't believe we were foolish. I believe we were lonely, and loneliness can foster a generosity that individuals focused on strategic calculations can exploit. So they relocated in. For approximately 6 months, things were genuinely good. There was life in the house. There was another person's coffee cup in the sink. I appreciated it. And then the shift occurred so gradually that I couldn't pinpoint the exact day. The first change involved my study. I had an office on the ground floor, and Tara proposed redecorating it as a nursery or guest room. I consented. My desk was relocated to the garage. Then came the artwork. Corey had personally selected every piece in that house. And over the course of about a year, most of it was removed and placed in storage, replaced by items Tara found more appealing. I remained silent. It was merely paint on canvas. She was alive, and my wife was not. There was one afternoon that I should have recognized the underlying implication at the time, but I failed to do so. I entered the kitchen to find Tara with a designer. They had fabric swatches spread across the island. I offered a pleasant remark about the arrangements. The designer then turned to me and inquired, "Oh, are you the father-in-law? It's so thoughtful of you to be able to stay with them. Stay with them." And Tara did not correct her. She allowed the statement to stand. She then added, "Graham, we're nearly finished in here. Would you mind? Would you mind?" In my own kitchen, I responded, "No, of course not." And taking my coffee, I retreated to the pool area like a guest asked to afford the family some privacy. This is how it unfolds. It's never a single, dramatic transgression. It's a series of 40 minor infringements. And each time, voicing an objection would cast you as the difficult party, so you refrain. Eventually, you find yourself relegated to the periphery. Then it was the guest house. They approached me together, as they invariably did for matters of consequence. They explained that with the impending arrival of the baby, my granddaughter, who is now 2 years old, it would be more practical for me to occupy the guest house at the rear of the property. More privacy, quieter for me, better for everyone involved. And the guest house is indeed quite pleasant. It's superior to any dwelling I inhabited until I reached the age of 50. That's beside the point. The crucial aspect is that I vacated the main residence, which I had purchased for my ailing wife, to reside in the auxiliary building at 66 years old, convincing myself it was my own decision. Once I was established there, any pretense of being consulted ceased entirely. Contractors would appear, and upon my inquiry about their activities, I would be informed politely that everything was under control. Miles began referring to it as our place in my presence, then to guests, and eventually directly to me, without even the minor courtesy of self-correction. And here's the detail I wish to be precise about, as it forms the legal foundation of this entire narrative. That house was unequivocally mine, solely and entirely. There was never an instant when it was not. My name alone, purchased with a wire transfer from the proceeds of a company I meticulously built. No mortgage, no partnership, no trust agreement, nothing. I had never affixed my signature to any document granting my son any ownership stake in that property, not a single one. He simply commenced acting as if it were his, and when no one corrected him for 2 years, he stopped considering it a matter of dispute. Now, allow me to recount the evening I overheard them. It was a Thursday in March. I had walked up to the main house around 9 o'clock to retrieve a book from the shelf in what had once been my study. I entered through the kitchen door, as was my custom. They were in the dining room, with a bottle of wine and Tara's parents participating via speakerphone. I paused in the darkness of the kitchen, listening as my son and daughter-in-law plotted my life. Gil and Lorraine Hale were in the process of selling their residence in Port St. Lucie. The plan, already well underway judging by their conversation, involved careful timing in which bedrooms Gil and Lorraine would occupy in the main house, the front rooms, my rooms, Adeline's rooms. And Lorraine's voice emerged from the speaker, posing the question, "And what about Graham?" And I heard my daughter-in-law reply, "Oh, he's quite content back there. And honestly, in the long term, there are some truly lovely residences in this area, like a Bonaventure or a Whitmore type of place. He'd be with people his own age." And I heard my son say, "Yes, probably a year or two. Likely a year or two." I stood in that darkened kitchen at 68 years old, utterly silent. I remained there, listening to them deliberate the placement of a nursing facility for me in the house I had purchased, while my wife's portrait languished in a storage unit in Riviera Beach. And I will articulate the precise emotion I experienced, and it was unexpected. It was not anger, it was clarity. It was the most unadulterated feeling I have encountered throughout my entire existence. It was akin to someone illuminating a room I had been navigating by touch for 3 years. Because in that instant, I finally comprehended something I had actively resisted acknowledging since Adeline's passing. My son was not going to transform into a different person. I had been anticipating that transformation for 3 years, and likely for 2 decades prior. I had been anticipating Miles evolving into the man I constantly assured myself he was deep down. And standing in that kitchen, I finally accepted that the man in the dining room was the final product and that I had created him, and that no amount of additional wealth would resolve a problem initiated by wealth itself. I retrieved my book. I returned to the guest house. I uttered not a single word, and the following morning, I contacted an attorney. Now, allow me to introduce Elena Marsh, because she is the reason this narrative possesses its conclusive ending. Elena is in her late 50s and specializes in estate and elder law. She was recommended to me by the individual who managed the sale of my company, crucially, by someone with absolutely no prior connection to my son. That detail proved significant, and it's the foremost piece of advice I would offer anyone. When seeking legal counsel for a matter of this nature, avoid using an attorney your family already knows. I sat in her office and recounted the entire sequence of events. Upon my completion, she posed a question no one had asked me in 3 years. She inquired, "Mr. Fielding, what is it that you truly desire?" I sat there, unable to formulate an answer, because for 3 years I had been managed, and the peculiar, disheartening aspect of being managed is that you cease to generate your own aspirations. You merely react to the plans others formulate for you. Elena allowed that silence to persist for a considerable duration. Then she said, "All right, a different question. If the house were to vanish tomorrow, simply vanish, what would you miss?" And I responded, "Nothing." And as I uttered those words, I realized their truth. There was nothing within that structure that I desired. My wife was no longer there. Even her artwork was absent. It was 11,000 square feet embodying someone else's conception of a life, and I had not slept a single night within its walls for 2 years. Elena then stated, "Then let us discuss what it could accomplish instead." Now, I wish to meticulously guide you through my actual actions because this is the aspect that individuals often misinterpret when recounting this story to me. And because it was entirely lawful and exceedingly mundane, it is precisely why it proved effective. Over the subsequent 11 weeks, I executed a charitable donation of that property. That's it. That's the entire maneuver. There was no elaborate scheme of retribution. There was no trap. An individual who possesses unencumbered ownership of a piece of real property is legally entitled to divest themselves of it, and I chose to give mine away. I donated it to a foundation. And here's what the foundation accomplishes, and the reasoning behind my selection, which I wish to elaborate on, as it is the crux of the entire matter. There exists a genuine and often silent crisis in this country concerning elderly individuals who possess substantial assets on paper but lack anyone in the world who truly desires their presence. And there's a secondary crisis: individuals caring for aging parents who are being utterly depleted financially, physically, and in their marital relationships because respite care is prohibitively expensive, and there's essentially no viable option between managing entirely on one's own and institutionalization. The foundation I selected operates precisely within that critical gap. They required and were unable to procure anywhere within that county a sizable residential property that could serve as a temporary refuge and transitional housing. A place where an 82-year-old could reside with dignity for a few months while their family navigated their circumstances. A place where a daughter who had devoted 6 years to caring for her mother could temporarily place her in a respectable environment for 2 weeks, allowing her to finally rest. I visited their current facilities before making my decision. Elena accompanied me. It was a converted ranch house situated near a busy 6-lane road, accommodating 8 individuals and boasting a waiting list of 91 names. The director offered 3 separate apologies for the air conditioning, and I stood in that hallway, contemplating 11 vacant bedrooms in Palm Beach, while a woman's voice from behind me informed someone that no openings were available until possibly November. That was the determining factor. That was the entire decision. It took approximately 4 seconds, and I have never once regretted it. Therefore, I bequeathed them a $12 million villa in Palm Beach, complete with 11 bedrooms, a pool, and an ocean vista. I stipulated a single condition for the gift, and only one. It had to bear my wife's name, the Adeline Fielding House. She had desired that residence her entire life and experienced only 14 months in it, most of them spent incapacitated. Now, her name graces its facade, and for the next 50 years, individuals will occupy those rooms, enjoying the pool and the waterfront view, knowing they are not alone in their final chapter. That is the closest approximation of justice I could construct from the circumstances. And I accept it. Those 11 weeks were the most peculiar of my life, and I wish to describe them because people often imagine I was exultant, which I was not. I shared meals with those 2 individuals repeatedly. I held my granddaughter on my lap in that living room While an architect, I had already waited in a parking lot outside a title company. I bid my son good morning in a driveway that had ceased to be mine 6 days prior. And each night, I returned to the guest house, and I did not feel particularly clever. I felt like a man observing an incoming wave from a considerable distance, fully aware of its trajectory and its point of impact, and having deliberately chosen not to issue a warning. I slept more soundly during those 11 weeks than I had in 3 years. Draw whatever conclusions you will from that. I have ceased trying to impose meaning on it. The legal finalization occurred in the third week of June, and I disclosed this to absolutely no one in my family. Now, I must recount the matter of the certified letter because this is the specific detail that transformed the entire situation into what it ultimately became. Elena was exceptionally clear with me. She stated, "We are not attempting to ambush anyone. We will provide ample written notice well in advance, with a definitive date, delivered in a manner that can be substantiated. Not because we are obligated to be considerate, but because I will not allow anyone to subsequently claim that you acted surreptitiously. Everything we do on record." Therefore, in the first week of July, a certified letter was dispatched to my son at that address. It stipulated that ownership of the property had been transferred to the foundation as of the closing date. It further stated that the foundation had granted him and his household a courtesy occupancy period, and it specified a definitive date by which the property was to be vacated. It was polite, it was remarkably clear, and he signed for it, and we possess his signature. And now, here is what Miles Fielding did with that correspondence. Nothing. He informed no one. He did not inform his wife. He did not inform her parents, who were at that very moment under contract to sell their home in Port St. Lucie. He received a certified letter informing him that the villa now belonged to a charitable foundation, and he decided, and I have contemplated this for a year, and I believe I understand his reasoning. He decided it was a bluff, that his father was being overly emotional, that he would simply visit his father and discuss the matter, and it would be resolved, as everything in his life had always been resolved. He never came. I wish to reiterate that statement because it represents the most poignant sentence in this entire account. My son received formal notification that he was losing a $12 million residence, and he did not deem it worthy of a 20-minute conversation with his father. Instead, he waited, and while he waited, his in-laws finalized the sale of their home. Now, allow me to describe the incident in the foyer, as that is where this entire affair began. It was the second week of August, and by that time, the foundation was actively engaged. Surveys were being conducted, contractors were present, and an architect was meticulously inspecting the property with a clipboard. I was at the main house that afternoon to meet with the project manager. Miles emerged into the front hall and inquired about the presence of all these individuals on the property. I informed him they were representatives of the foundation. He then stated, and I could perceive he had concluded this was the opportune moment to put an end to this charade. "Dad, we need to be direct with each other. This has gone on long enough. Gil and Lorraine finalized the sale of their house in 3 weeks. They'll be moving in here. This belongs to them now. And honestly, at this juncture, do not ever show your face here again unless you receive an invitation." Tara was positioned on the stairs, having emerged to observe the exchange. And she laughed. Not a boisterous laugh, but a light, airy one. The kind you employ when the outcome has never been in doubt. She remarked, "Graham, really, you belong in a nursing home, not a palace." And I regarded them both. And I wish to be completely candid about my feelings, because I suspect they are not what people anticipate. I do not feel a sense of victory. I was acutely aware of what was imminent, and I derived no pleasure from it. What I experienced was fatigue, profound sadness, and a sentiment bordering on pity, because I was the sole individual in that hallway who grasped the forthcoming reality for all of us. And in that moment, I understood that I still possessed the power to halt it. I could have spoken then and there, uttering the forced sentences that would have averted the entire situation. And I did not. I have scrutinized that decision more intensely than any other in my life, and I will share my conclusion. I remained silent not to exact retribution. I remained silent because I had finally, at 68 years old, ceased attempting to manage my son's life for him. He received a certified letter. He made a choice regarding its contents. For the first time in 39 years, I allowed my son to experience the consequences of not addressing a situation. This is either the most paternal act I have ever undertaken for him, or the most callous, and on some days, I still remain uncertain. So, I smiled, nodded, and replied, "All right." I retrieved my hat and departed. 11 days later, 3 moving vans ascended the driveway. Now, I wish to explain my presence, as this is the singular action I admit was deliberate, and I have made my peace with it. I was there at the request of the foundation. That was the day the signage was to be installed, and the project team was conducting their official walkthrough. They had invited me for the brief ceremonial aspect, essentially the dedication plaque. It had been scheduled for weeks. Did I know Gil and Lorraine were closing around that time? Yes. Did I know it was the precise same morning? No, I did not, and that is the unvarnished truth. However, I would be dissembling if I claimed to regret it when the trucks arrived. I am not that virtuous a man. Here is what was present in that house. 6 individuals from the foundation, including their executive director, an architect, 2 contractors with blueprints spread across the dining room table, a project manager wearing a hard hat, my attorney, Elena Marsh, impeccably dressed in a suit with a folder as she never overlooks details, and a deputy from the sheriff's office. Not due to any anticipation of trouble, but because Elena had formally requested a civil standby, a standard procedure when a property transfer involves individuals who may not have fully comprehended the situation. And on the wall of the entryway, affixed approximately 2 hours earlier, was a brushed bronze plaque that read, "The Adeline Fielding House, Respite and Transitional Residence." And I was seated in a chair by the window in that front hall, wearing my hat, having just entered from outside. The front doors stood wide open, as contractors were transporting equipment through. Consequently, the Hales did not even need to knock. They simply walked in, Gil first, then Lorraine, and then Tara, carrying coffee in one hand and the keys in the other. They entered the entryway engaged in conversation, mid-sentence, as one does when arriving at a place one considers their own. And they stopped. I wish to describe this precisely, as it occurred in distinct phases and took approximately 8 seconds in total. Initially, they observed the presence of people, a dozen strangers, hard hats, diagrams on the table, a man in a sheriff's uniform standing by the dining room door. Lorraine then exclaimed, "Oh, pardon me. Are we?" The way one does when one believes they have entered the wrong gathering. Then Tara noticed me, seated in a chair by the window, and I watched her expression undergo a complex transformation as I was never supposed to appear there again. And there I was, seated as if I had been waiting for 11 days, which in a sense I had. And then she saw the plaque on the wall. I observed her eyes as they scanned it, then returned to the beginning, rereading it, as one does when the words don't quite form a coherent meaning on the first pass. The Adeline Fielding House. Adeline, my wife, her deceased husband's mother-in-law, on a bronze plaque affixed to the wall of a house her parents were to move into in 3 hours. And I wish to be precise about the sequence of realization, because it was the sequence that inflicted the damage. She did not read that plaque and think, "We have been wronged." That would have been a hardship, but survivable. What she perceived, standing in a doorway with her parents behind her and their own house already sold, was irrefutable evidence that the entire matter had been resolved and finalized and permanently displayed on a wall in bronze, and that the finalization had taken months. Bronze is not an instantaneous process. Bronze involves a lead time, and if it had taken months, then someone had been aware of it for months. I watched her complete that entire line of thought while she was still standing on the doormat. And that is when she dropped the keys. They struck the marble with a resounding clang. You know the sound a set of keys makes on a hard floor in a large room, and no one moved to retrieve them. They simply lay there on the floor for what felt like an extended period. And Vernon Hale, for whom I have never harbored ill will and still do not, asked, "Tara, what is this?" And at that exact moment, my son entered through the front door behind them. I will never forget his expression because Miles comprehended everything instantaneously. He did not need to read the plaque. He had held the letter in his possession for 5 weeks. And I watched my son enter a room and, in a single instant, realized that the situation he had chosen to disregard had transpired precisely as stated in writing, on schedule, and that his wife and her parents were standing in the midst of it. Elena Marsh stepped forward and introduced herself, stating calmly that she represented Mr. Fielding, that ownership of the property had transferred to the foundation in June, that written notification had been provided and signed for on a specific date, and that she had copies of all pertinent documentation with her, should anyone wish to review them. She had brought copies, of course, and Tara turned and looked at her husband, inquiring, "Signed for?" What was she talking about, signed for? And Miles offered no response, and that silence provided her answer. I then rose from my chair and retrieved her keys from the floor, handing them back to her as she was trembling. It seemed the humane course of action, and I spoke the only words I uttered that entire morning. I said, "There's a commendable facility in Wellington that accepts new residents. Your mother is welcome to apply. We maintain a waiting list." And then I put on my hat and walked out, past the moving trucks. All right, the unvarnished remainder of the account, because these stories always gravitate toward a satisfying conclusion. Gil and Lorraine Hale had already finalized the sale of their home. That was a real consequence, and it was unfortunate. And I want to be clear that I have never, for a single second, felt good about that aspect. These are two individuals in their 70s who sold their home because their daughter and son-in-law informed them a villa awaited them, and it did not, because my son neglected to act upon a letter. They resided in a rental property for 4 months. It was Lorraine, of all people, who contacted me approximately 6 weeks later on a Sunday. She was not angry, and I have replayed that telephone conversation in my mind countless times. She said, "Graham, I want you to know that I do not hold you responsible. I would have done the same thing. I just wish someone had informed us." And I told her that was the most truthful statement anyone had made regarding this entire affair, and I meant it sincerely. We are now, in a peculiar way, on amicable terms. She sent a car at Christmas. Miles and Tara's marriage did not withstand the repercussions. They separated within approximately 5 months, and the divorce was finalized this past spring. And I wish to be precise here, as I recognize how this might sound, and I will not sugarcoat it. That outcome was not solely my doing, nor was it entirely independent of my actions. I have ceased pretending those are distinct possibilities. What ultimately dissolved that marriage was not the house itself. It was the revelation, witnessed by her parents, that her husband had been aware of the situation for 5 weeks and had remained silent. Everything that followed was merely a matter of paperwork. Miles and I did not communicate for 7 months. Then, in March, a year after that evening in the kitchen, an anniversary I noticed, and I suspect he did as well, he contacted me. We met at a coffee establishment in West Palm Beach, and I want to state honestly that it was not a reconciliation. It was profoundly difficult and lacked warmth. He was still resentful. He accused me of humiliating him, and I responded, "Yes, that is fair, and I apologize that it occurred in front of your in-laws, but I would make the same decision again." And then he uttered the sentence that resonates most with me. He said, "You could have simply told me." And I replied, "Miles, I sent you a certified letter." And he sat there, and I watched him grasp it, truly comprehend it for the first time, that it had never, in his entire life, occurred to him to take his father's actions seriously. That the letter had arrived, and he had categorized it under things Dad will eventually get over. He is 39 years old. That was the first consequence he had ever experienced that I did not financially mitigate for him. Our current relationship is, I lack a suitable term to describe it. We converse. It is a cautious interaction. He is presently employed in a legitimate job for someone else, and he is not yet proficient at it, and he dislikes it intensely. And I have not offered him a single dollar, nor do I intend to. That is the most paternal action I have ever taken, and I initiated it at 68 years old. And my granddaughter is 2.5 years old. I see her every other weekend. Tara has been remarkably reasonable about it, considerably more so than I anticipated, and I have expressed my appreciation for that. That little girl will grow up knowing her grandfather, and that holds more value than that house ever did. The estate required nearly a year for its conversion and officially opened last summer. It accommodates 12 residents concurrently, along with 4 respite beds that turn over continuously. I visit on Thursdays. I do not perform any tasks of substance. I am not a nurse, and I would be a liability. I sit by the water with whoever expresses a desire for companionship, and primarily, I listen to individuals in their 80s recount their life experiences, which, it turns out, is the most rewarding way I have discovered to spend morning. There is a gentleman there named Aurelio, who is 91. He served in the Merchant Marine and has traveled the entire globe twice over, and he has no living family whatsoever. Not a single relative. And every Thursday, as I settle in, he poses the same question: "Graham, what's the news?" And I provide him with the news. That's it. That constitutes the entirety of our friendship. He occupies the chair by the seawall, the very same spot. I have never mentioned the 5 weeks of respite to him, nor will I ever. Rosa Cruz. I must tell you about Rosa because I have deliberately saved her for last. Rosa was the housekeeper for that residence for 22 years, dating back to the previous home before Palm Beach. She was present throughout Adeline's entire illness. She sat with my wife during afternoons when I found myself unable to endure being in the room, and I have never adequately expressed my gratitude for her unwavering support, as there is simply no adequate way to do so. And when Miles and Tara moved in, they reduced her working days and then dismissed her entirely via text message after 19 years of service, without severance or notice, because Tara preferred to utilize a contracted service. That was, in fact, the very first action I took. Prior to engaging the foundation, before any of it, that was during my first week with Elena. I established an annuity for Rosa, a substantial one, funded monthly for the remainder of her life, including her health coverage. By an overwhelming margin, it represents the most prudent financial expenditure I have ever made, and it required no one to relinquish anything. She now works at the estate, believe it or not. The foundation independently hired her as their residence manager after I provided them with her name and stepped aside. She oversees that entire building. She is intimately familiar with every aspect of it. She is the one who conducts tours for the families. She still addresses me as Sir after 23 years, and I have relinquished the desire to change that. Here is the point I continually return to. and then I will conclude. My daughter-in-law declared I belonged in a nursing home instead of a palace, and she intended it as the most disparaging remark she could conceive of uttering, implying I was aged irrelevant, and that individuals like myself were meant to be stored away, out of sight, while people like her enjoyed the prime accommodations. And what I continually ponder is that she was not incorrect regarding the structure itself. She was mistaken about its intended beneficiaries. That residence now accommodates elderly individuals every single day. People in their 70s and 80s, residing in the desirable rooms with waterfront views, attended to by individuals who have chosen to provide that care. It is, in the most literal interpretation, a nursing home housed within a palace. She christened it. I merely handled the administrative details. And here is the takeaway message I genuinely wish for you to retain, if you choose to retain anything. I did not undertake this to exact revenge upon anyone. Had my objective been retribution, I possessed far superior options, several of which Elena meticulously outlined for me. I did it because on the night I stood in that darkened kitchen, I finally comprehended the true nature of my affliction for the preceding 3 years. It was not that my son desired my house. It was that I no longer desired anything myself. I possessed 11,000 square feet and every conceivable reason to be content, yet I could not articulate a single aspiration for the remainder of my life. And a man who desires nothing is akin to mere furniture. He is moved and repositioned by whoever is engaged in decorating the room. The day I determined the purpose of that estate, I ceased to be furniture. That is the entirety of the narrative. Everything else, the keys on the floor, the moving vans, the expression on her face, that is merely what transpired subsequently. And frankly, it held considerably less significance than I had anticipated. Was Graham wrong to let his son take over his home for 3 years? Or was donating the house the only way to reclaim his own life? Tell me what you think in the comments below. If this story made you think, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. We post new family dramas every week, and you won't want to miss what happens next.